Hello, welcome to True Crime Talk. This is Kathleen, and in this video, I want to talk about a horrible, horrific crime and our horrible, horrific justice system. This piece of doo-doo on the screen right here is Lapas Favors. It's Lapas Favors. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, and I don't care. This man should be deceased or on death row, but unfortunately, he's still alive in prison. And for whatever reason, the Georgia Department of Corrections has decided that he should be recommended for work release. This is a news report that explains this case that this man was involved in.
A man convicted in a horrific deadly attack could soon be free. Lapas Favors is serving life for the murder of Gene Bice and severely beating Betty Ann Miles. Right now, a state board is considering whether to grant parole to Favors. Miles' family says the crimes are so vicious, Favors should never see the light of day.
They were both working moms.
Gene Bice and Betty Ann Miles had just finished lunch at Glen Lake Park in Decatur back in 1981. They got into Betty Ann's car when two men grabbed them.
The doors were opened on either side, each by a man. They were dragged out of the car.
The men dragged the women into the woods and unleashed a vicious assault.
They were tortured, I would say, for a long time.
Gene Bice raped and murdered. Betty Ann Miles beaten so severely she barely escaped with her life.
To this day, she does not speak of it with her family.
Anthony Wiley serving a life sentence on a host of charges, including aggravated sodomy, kidnapping, and murder. Lapas Favors serving life as well. His charges include murder, kidnapping, and armed robbery. His brother, Rodney Favors, convicted as well.
Justice was served.
Wiley and Favors are inmates at Wheeler Correctional Facility in South Georgia. On Sunday, Betty Ann's family received this letter stating Lapas Favors was under consideration for a work release program.
A shock, and like the bottom fell out of everything.
A spokesman for Georgia's State Board of Pardons and Paroles confirms right now the board is reviewing the case of Lapas Favors, possibly for parole.
The two men that were involved in this should never be free again.
Bob Wilson was the Dekalb County DA who prosecuted this case.
The act was so unspeakable that it places concerns to all who know about it for safety of the community and safety of the families.
And I want for this Lapas Favors to not be released on parole. That's justice. You know, the trial was done. The jurors spoke. The judge sentenced. Let's honor that.
Now, court records say Rodney Favors, that's Lapas Favors' brother, was released in 1998 after serving nearly 17 years. The state has a 90-day window to review Lapas Favors' case. They could make a decision sometime after August 8th.
Okay, that's the news report regarding this case. Lapas Favors is the one still in prison right here, but he is up for parole. His brother that they spoke about, who already got out in the late 1990s, was the getaway driver. So there were actually three men involved in this crime. But it was this man, Lapas Favors, and this man, Anthony Wiley, that actually kidnapped, tortured, abused, and robbed the two women. The brother of Lapas, his brother, was only the getaway driver, supposedly. Well, not supposedly. I mean, the surviving witness, identified these two men. So the brother of Lapas was a getaway driver. So I guess it's all right that he got out after 17 years, I suppose. However, let's read a story regarding this case that was put out at the time it happened. This was before the perps were called. This story was written or published September 23rd, 1981. And this is from the archives. This is obviously before the internet was a thing, so it's in a printed newspaper. It says authorities are searching for two men who AR'd, and then that's it. And it goes into the story. It says Decatur, Georgia. Authorities are searching for two men who AR'd and kicked a 34-year-old woman to death and severely injured another woman in a park where they went for a lunch break picnic. Shock and consternation spread through the Atlanta suburb, and a reward fund of $14,000 was established for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the two black men who apparently left Glen Lake Park in a green 1969 Pontiac GTO auto after attacking the two women at midday. So this was during daylight hours at a park, a public park. A 4-hour autopsy revealed Tuesday that Jean Bice of Tucker was severely beaten, essayed, and died from a kick to the chest that ripped her heart. Dekalb County medical examiner Joe Burton said the autopsy also revealed that Mrs. Bice had been struck several times on the head and had bruises over much of her body. Her hands and feet had been bound with her pantyhose. Burton said Mrs. Bice apparently fought with her attackers before her death. Her body bore the kinds of injury you see in someone who is being beaten or attacked and is struggling with the attacker. So, in other words, defense wounds. Another woman, 34-year-old Betty Ann Miles of Stockbridge, was injured in the attack but escaped by climbing a 6-foot-tall chain-link fence. She is listed in fair condition at DeKalb General Hospital. The two women, both workers at Decatur Federal Savings and Loan Association, were having lunch at midday at the park when the two men forced them into nearby woods. Decatur police officer Scott Rollins said the thing that puzzles us is that it was such an active park and that no one was in the park. Mrs. Bice was the daughter-in-law of the Reverend Lester Bice, pastor of the Rehoboth Baptist Church in Tucker. I'm praying they'll catch them, the attackers, so they won't do that to anyone else, said Bice, whose pastorate is the second largest Southern Baptist congregation in Georgia. Whoever it is needs definite punishment. She was a gift from the Lord, said Bice. Fortunately, she gave us two granddaughters, Susan, who is 12, and Leslie, who is 13. So 3 perps were arrested for this crime. Anthony Wiley, La Paz Favors, and I believe the third one was Rodney Favors, the brother of La Paz. And they're all related. Wiley is the cousin of the Favors brothers, and La Paz and Rodney are brothers. So Rodney got out after 17 years because apparently he was just a getaway driver. But this is how the crime went down. So you have these 3 people, Anthony and the 2 Favors brothers, sitting around at the mom's apartment, the Favors boys' mother's apartment, trying to think of what they could do to get some money. And they decided that they would rob somebody. And so they get in one of the Favors brothers' car and they drive around and they end up at the park where these 2 women were having lunch on their lunch break from work. So they park there, and at the time there are 2 other cars around, but those cars eventually left. And so it was just these 3 jerks in a car and the 2 women sitting at a picnic table in the park eating their lunch while on their hour lunch break. So after the other cars leave, that's when they decide to make their moves. And Wiley and La Paz put on an undershirt for a face mask. They make a face mask out of undershirts that they had. And they got their guns ready and they get out and proceed to walk. Once they saw the women walking back to the car and getting in the car, that's when they decided to strike. And the third offender, the third perp, he took the car and he went to go wait at the entrance for the brothers to finish with their crime, and he was the getaway driver. So he wasn't there when these two women were kidnapped and assaulted and robbed, technically. But you have to think that he knew they were there for more than just robbery, because if they were just going to rob the women, all they had to do was get out, rob them, take their jewelry and their money, the purses, get back in the car and leave, because nobody else was around at the time. Kidnapping them and making them go into the woods, the third person involved, who only got 17 years, had to know that they were up to more than just robbery. But anyway, he's out and about now, or dead, or what, I don't know, but he only served 17 years. So these other two men involved, each of them had a gun. They go to each side of the car, one at the passenger side, one at the driver's side, and they point their guns at the two women, and they make them hand over their jewelry, money, and purses. So after they finished robbing them, then they make the women at gunpoint go into the woods, and they're abusing them the whole way. They're pushing them down, shoving them, and on the way, I believe it's Wiley, tells the women to take their clothes off. So as you know, they're forcing them to take their clothes off. They're physically pushing them down and dragging them to the area where they're gonna commit their abuse or whatever. And so what happens is, once they're in the woods, they tie the women up. They are sexually abused and tortured. It's my understanding that Wiley was the main SAer, the main maybe physical abuser, but they both participated in tying them up. They both were there. La Paz did nothing to help the women or try to talk Wiley out of it or anything. So he was there. He was a part of it. He was part of the robbery, part of the kidnapping, part of the physical abuse, and he was there for the sexual abuse. So he's just as much a piece of scum as Wiley. Wiley got life in prison, so did La Paz, but for some reason La Paz, this piece of doo-doo right here, well, I can't find it. It timed out. But that picture I showed you earlier of La Paz, his prison inmate picture from the Georgia prison system, that dude is up for parole or a work release where he can get out of prison. And I don't care how old he is, just because time goes by, it doesn't make his crime any less awful or worse. He was given a life sentence, and the parole board of Georgia should honor that life sentence that the jury gave him. And what sucks so bad about this case, at least, Wiley was up for the death penalty. But because of one juror holdout on the death penalty, he was able to just get life in prison. So he's still alive in prison, and hope to God they never decide to give him parole or anything. So, life, unfortunately, doesn't mean life, doesn't mean natural life in a lot of states. So even though these two men committed awful acts and crimes against these two women, one was murdered that day, the other survived because let me tell you some more facts about the case. Okay, so Wiley, in addition to SAing the women, he also SA'd them with a stick. He tortured them with a stick. He inserted a stick in them and he stabbed them with a stick. Sexual torture. So both women, the survivor and the one that ended up dead, the murder victim in this case, Mrs. Bice, died from being stomped on and her chest exploding in her, her heart exploding in her chest, basically. He stomped her sternum and broke her bones, and it penetrated her heart cavity area, and that's how Mrs. Bice died. She was beaten or kicked and stomped to death. In addition to being sexually abused while she was still alive and sexually tortured with a stick while she was still alive. That did not kill her. It was the stomping of her chest that finally killed her. While Wiley turned his attention to the surviving victim in this case, because La Paz had tied her up, once she was tied up, Wiley went over and sexually abused her. Mrs. Bice, still alive before she got stomped to death, tried to get up and run, but she was so badly injured that she just basically keeled over or, pitched forward from the research I read, and she couldn't go nowhere. So she just ended up, laying back on the ground while he was assaulting the surviving victim in this case, Wiley was. But La Paz was still there. At some point, La Paz went back to find his brother in the getaway car. And when Wiley was, I guess, he was throwing the women's clothes in the woods, I guess to hide them or whatever, and finishing up his abuse or whatever, the surviving victim was able to untie her hands or legs or whatever, and she ran off, and she climbed a 6-foot fence to get away to save her life. She tried to, once Wiley had left, I guess, she tried to resuscitate, or not resuscitate, but she tried to, get her friend to regain consciousness, but her friend, apparently was already dead, so she ran off, and she was able to find help. I can't give all the details about what happened in the woods to these two women, but it's awful. And I will link information down below this video so you can research and read for yourself. But it was just a horrible, horrible case. It wasn't just a robbery. It wasn't just an armed robbery. It wasn't just a kidnapping. It wasn't just an SA. It was torture. It was horrific. It was torture just for this hell of torturing people for no reason. So anyway, these 3 pieces of shit ended up being caught. One got 17 years or longer, but he was released after 17 years. I don't know if he got longer and was released early or what, but he's out of prison. But he was the getaway driver. The 2 perps involved in all the abuse and who were there for all the abuse and all that, the kidnapping and all that, were given life sentences because Anthony Wiley, as this article says, it says killer narrowly escapes death sentence. This is from December 14th, 1981. So I believe this crime happened in September 1981, and by December they had been tried and convicted. But the jury on the death penalty case for Anthony Wiley, it says, Anthony Wiley was sentenced to 6 consecutive life prison terms Monday for the savage stomping death of a bank auditor and the sexual assault of her co-worker after one juror refused to send and it says text omitted. So I'm going to assume it says to send the defendant to the death penalty. In addition to the 6 life terms, Wiley also was given 45 years for several other counts, including aggravated assault against Mrs. Bice and aggravated assault and battery against Mrs. Miles. Excuse me. Wilson described the crime as incredibly heinous and said there would never be a more appropriate time for the death penalty to be imposed. And I guess Wilson was the prosecutor. Said Mrs. Bice, daughter-in-law of a prominent local minister, died from a kick to the chest that tore her heart. A medical examiner testified she had been beaten and sexually attacked with a tree branch. Judge Peeler asked the jurors whether Amory had said he was opposed to the death penalty. Each juror said Amory was apparently in favor of the death penalty, but not in this case. So one idiot, I guess named Amory, even though, to get on the death penalty jury, he had to say that he wasn't opposed to the death penalty, but he said not in this case. I mean, I don't know what other case would need the death penalty. Wiley, he raped, tortured. I mean, the Amory, I don't know if it's a male or female. I'm assuming maybe a male. I don't know, but must have hated women or lied about not being opposed to the death penalty, because there's one juror is why Wiley is still alive and hasn't been put to death. The jury had reported twice earlier that it was deadlocked, once in a 10-2 vote and later at 11-1. Peeler had reminded the jurors at the time, Judge Peeler, that they had sworn they were not opposed to the death penalty and ordered them to resume deliberations. The life sentences were imposed for the murder, armed robbery, and kidnapping of Mrs. Bice, and the kidnapping, armed robbery, and aggravated S of Mrs. Miles. The jury deliberated less than 2 hours Saturday before finding Wiley guilty of 10 counts. Wiley, who wept while hearing the verdict, pleaded that his life be spared during the sentence hearing, but Wilson asked the jury to send him to the electric chair. He doesn't care what he did to Jean Bice, Wilson said. He doesn't care what he did to Betty Ann Miles. This man should never have the remotest possibility of ever hurting a human being again. So Wiley is still in prison, and he's not up for parole and never has been to my knowledge. So he's in there for life. Unfortunately, he was not put to death. However, in the case of La Paz Favors is up for parole. And somebody actually recommended him for parole, the Georgia Department of Corrections or whatever. And so he is actually up for parole. So I, as a citizen of Georgia and a citizen of the United States, am going to contact the parole board to let them know my opinions on this case. I don't know if it'll do any good. And it could be that there really isn't much of a real chance that he would get out. I don't know. I don't know the mindset of the pardons and parole boards, who gets to make this decision. I don't know what their way of thinking is. But for the deceased victim in this case and the surviving victim and all the family members of both victims, I'm going to contact the parole board as a citizen of Georgia and let them know how I feel about this case. And I'll have the information down below this video if anybody else wants to also. And you don't have to be from the state of Georgia. You can just be a concerned citizen anywhere in this country. Because no person convicted of such a heinous crime needs to get out of prison. I don't care how old they are, how well behaved they've been in prison. This was a horrific, horrific crime. This involved sexual torture, murder, horrific physical abuse, beatings, and cruelty. I mean, the whole time, once they kidnapped them and making them walk into the woods, they were beating them, pushing them down, dragging them, forcing them to undress, tying them up, and abusing them in the most horrific ways. And I don't care. People say, well, maybe, Wiley was the main abuser and La Paz wasn't as abusive. It doesn't matter. They were both there. They both were participating in this. Neither one of them cared or had a conscience about what they were doing. So I will put all kinds of information down below this video if you want to get in touch with the parole board about this case and let them know how you feel. And other information if you just want to research this case to learn more about it, because it's horrific. I can't give all the details because it's just too horrific. Just an awful, awful crime. And so this is, I want to show you the Find a Grave website for Jean Culbertson Bice. She was the woman who died that day. She was murdered. She was a wife and mother. She was a daughter-in-law of a well-known pastor in the area. And this is just the thing when she got married when she was younger. It says, Miss Culbertson. Mr. and Mrs. Carl Clinton Culbertson announced the engagement of their daughter, Carla Jean Culbertson to Philip Leslie Bice, son of Reverend and Mrs. Lester Bice. Miss Culbertson attended Dekalb College and is now employed by a construction firm in Tucker. Mr. Bice attends the Southern Technical Institute and is self-employed in Tucker. The wedding will be solemnized Friday at Rehoboth Baptist Church. So this is her marriage announcement when she was younger and first getting married. And then, of course, later we have her funeral announcement. It says services for Mrs. Jean C. Bice, 35 of Tucker, will be at 2:30 p.m. Wednesday at Rehoboth Baptist Church. Burial in Floral Hills Memory Gardens. Mrs. Bice, an auditor for Decatur Federal Savings and Loan Association, died Monday. Survivors include her husband, Philip Bice, daughters, Miss Leslie Bice and Miss Susie Bice, both of Tucker. Remember, they were like 11 and 12 years old at the time of her murder. Mr. and Mrs. Carl Culbertson of Winterville and brother Hugh Culbertson of Houston, Texas. So her parents had to endure this horrific death of their daughter. And her father died in 2000 and her mother died in 2019. Her husband, Philip Leslie Bice, did go on to get remarried at some point. But he was a Vietnam veteran and he passed away in 2020 at the age of 73. So he got remarried and he had, of course, his two daughters and he had grandchildren and great-grandchildren by the time of his death. So Jean Bice missed out on her grandchildren and her daughters growing up and all that. So for no other reason than two vicious, cruel men decided to take her life that day. They couldn't just rob them. They couldn't even just, essay them and leave. They had to abuse them, beat them, murder them, torture them, and all that. So, sometimes in these cases, as time passes on, we forget that there are real people involved, real families who still suffer from this. I mean, I'm sure her husband, even though he went on to remarry, I'm sure this bothered him the rest of his whole life, and definitely her children. And then her grandchildren that never got to know her, knowing that their grandmother was murdered long before they ever were born. So this was such a heinous, heinous crime, and it's ridiculous, so ridiculous that anybody could even be up for parole for a crime like this. I don't care how old they are. Yes, time may heal all wounds. As time goes on, people forget, I guess. But I'm sure the surviving victim, didn't forget, and I'm sure her family members and the family members who lost Jean that day still remember and carry this with them. But it doesn't matter how old he is. He should stay in prison for the rest of his life. He's lucky he didn't get the death penalty. Both of them are. Just a horrible, horrible crime. They're both equally guilty. They're both pieces of shit.